why I like the guideline marker, for one thing, is it really helps just to make my sewing and my stitching really precise. And I always teach about precision, and that's always something that when I work with my students, I tell them it really does come with practice. However, when you have really great tools and technology like this, it kind of just helps that come a little bit faster too. So it really can give your sewing results, just take them to another level. So even if you're a beginning sewer, things like this really can, again, give you really good results without years and years of practice. And even with years and years of practice, there are still little things that technology just is one step ahead of us. So I think it really just helps me attain great results in my sewing, and those are things that people comment on a lot in a lot of my designs. And although I've done it for a long time, my machine helps me kind of achieve that love of sewing that I have. So before I show you how we're going to use the guideline marker in our project, I want to illustrate how this works in one more way. And this was something that I learned years ago, almost 25 years ago, when I worked for a tailor. Now, we did a lot of men's tailoring, so we had a lot of wool fabrics, and we used tailor's chalk. And I have a little piece of fabric right here, and what I want to illustrate is, for example, if a client came in and we were marking their suit or whatever part of the suit we were working on, we would use tailor's chalk, and we would go in and we'd maybe put little hash marks on the garment. We wouldn't draw like harsh straight lines, because although that this irons off and would go away, that's just not how you mark. It's usually like quicker little chalk lines that later on you go and connect the dots. Now, when you say this was a hem and you wanted to turn this under, and that was going to be your finished edge, what we would then do is we would lightly connect the dots with our chalk, and after doing this a ton of times, it's fairly precise. But even still, it's not like that, I don't even know the descriptive word for it, but not that really like 100% precision that you can get with an actual laser, because it's very crisp, and there's some organicness to this. So I just thought that, as I started learning about the guideline marker, that was the first thing that popped in my mind, of like remembering how we would mark when I tailored and connecting the dots, and how this just, instead of having to chalk up everywhere, you don't even have to put the chalk on your fabric. You can literally use that guideline marker. And why that's important is because you might have fabrics like silks or even some synthetic fabrics that if you use a lot of marking chalks and things like that and pencils, although they're erasable, they just don't always come off, and after washing, sometimes there is a residue. So there's certainly an advantage to not having to actually mark your fabric. So let's take a look, and the first thing that I want to illustrate, and the first example, would be quilting. And I do have some quilting in our project, but the first example that I want to show you would be, and this Riley Blake design fabric that I have inside my dress actually is a really good one for this. Say, for example, that you are quilting, or whatever you're doing, garment, fashion sewing, doesn't matter, but let's say that we want to do some decorative stitching to kind of create texture to a fabric that has a print on it, because this is a print. And let's say, for example, we want to put stitching and we want to connect these points all the way down the fabric. Now, yes, you certainly could take a ruler and chalk that out, but I also like to save time when I'm sewing. So I'm going to go over and click that guide beam. There you go. And what I want to do now is I'm going to put my foot down. I'm going to go ahead and line the beam up with my needle position. So I'm just going to shift that over, and I can tell pretty easily. You can also line it up with the dot that's on the machine, because that's going to be right in line with that too if you need to. And I'm going to put that under there. And there are little notches and things on your presser foot that you can always use as a guide too, but the reference on the machine is pretty accurate. So now you can see that the other cool thing about the guideline marker is it extends your line of sight much further. So similar to the chalk marking example that I just gave you, because normally we would have a bigger area, so you'd have a much bigger area that you would be connecting the dots. And the other thing that I learned with that too is that you don't look where you're starting, you look where you're going. And so you know, a lot of people say, oh, you can draw a really straight line. Well, I don't look here. I keep my eye here. So as I'm drawing, my eyes are always fixed here. And somehow it works. The shortest distance between point A and point B, you know, is a straight line. So if you're looking where you're going, and that's what this guideline marker does. It's showing you where you're going. Unlike the edge of a, you know, here, if you sometimes use the markings on here, they're very short. So this extends that. So let's just run this through the machine. And yep, make sure I've got my straight line. And what I'm doing basically is I'm just making sure that that little laser, and I'm just watching right here, as long as I know that this point is going right through those end points, and see now that point, I'm not even holding the fabric, it's so straight. So we'll pull that out and take a look and see how, I mean, that just connects perfectly. Now let's do an example without the marker, okay? We'll eyeball it, and I can do this fairly well, but just to kind of illustrate, I don't have an edge. Like for example, if I wanted to use this as a reference point and hold that straight, I wouldn't have that here. So if I just use this without the guideline marker, now I'm looking right here, and I can get that pretty straight, but every once in a while I have to kind of curve my fabric just a little bit to do that. And it might not seem like a big deal, but if there's little hesitations, and again, it's precision, and you probably can't see that because it's so fine, but those little hesitations can make a huge difference in your quilting, in your garment sewing, when you're lining things up. If you want seams that, say a waistband, for example, where they need to intersect and correspond, that precision is what will, I mean, that can affect your fit too. If things don't line up, they don't fit as well either. And I guess it's kind of a lazy feature too, because then we don't have to try so hard for lining it up, right? But it's cool.